Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Well, engagers, welcome once again to another episode of the Professor Game Podcast. And today we have Pete with us. But before we get started, Pete, or Peter, actually, are you prepared to engage?
I am.
Let's do this because Peter Williamson is a professional golfer turned social entrepreneur who sees physical games as a way to catalyze conversations and problem solving. He's based in the US in Washington, D.C., where he started a creative agency in 2018 called Game Genius. It focuses on supporting the local region through non-digital play. The company designs custom games, workshops, and public events to help people enjoy what they do while building community awareness. To this date, they have served over 100 organizations and designed 2 citywide treasure hunts with game projects addressing topics like toxic partisanship, mental health, environmental behavior change, financial literacy, and creative philanthropy. So very, very complete and very interesting stuff that you are doing. Peter, is there anything we're missing from that intro?
No, that was great. Thank you.
Happy to have you here today with us. And Peter, we are in a coronavirus situation now. So yes. You can go either way. What does it look like nowadays? What did it look like 2 weeks or a month from now? What does, being Peter Williamson in a day like today look like?
Yeah, it's a very interesting, constantly changing question, I think, now. But as you mentioned in the intro, I come from the world of professional golf. And so I am really into using games to help people make what they do and what they care about more fun. And that allows me to wear a lot of different hats. So I have a bit of an architecture background as well. So thinking about designing spaces and joining different types of networks that are in different creative spaces, whether it be sort of the arts and cultures in a city, and all the way to sort of the kind of big philanthropic givers and networks and ways to help the community. There are a lot of great resources in the city, and they're having challenges to try to share their mission. And in a place like DC, kind of at the center of a lot of different organizations and agencies, communication is really, really important, as we're seeing nowadays. And we're trying to bring a little bit of fun and gamification to help people realize some better strategies and ways that they can engage their community in a way that takes care of both their mental health, but also sort of the health of the overall community.
Very, very interesting and hopefully very helpful as well for all of this situation we're living nowadays. But Pete, we always like to start sort of strong as well once we get through these pleasantries of understanding what do you look like, what does your day look like, your company, etc. And we would like to know of a time when, you had what we've heard before as maybe your favorite fail or first attempt in learning. One of those times when you set out to do something with one of your projects related to games ideally, and it didn't work exactly as you wanted to, or it completely flopped, at least the first time. And we want to learn from that. We want to know what happened. We want to know what were your key insights. How did you turn it around if you did? We want to be there with you. Go to the ground level.
Yeah. What failure don't I love? I really don't want to say I enjoy failing, but I find a lot of wonderful challenges out of failures. I see the things that I maybe overlooked. I see ways that I can get better as sort of an individual game designer, but also just as a person or a philanthropist in the city. And so I love all sort of failures equally, but some examples can kind of range from my individual background. So the things that I've learned, again, as a professional athlete, not overworking or practicing too much, because I think the excitement of being in a space like this, where you get to play all day long, it energizes you, but you have to be really cognizant of your own sort of mental health and your energy so that you can help people in a sort of effective, efficient, and sustainable manner. And so a lot of the failures that I like to share are all about going to a project where I had a really ambitious goal, and there's obviously nothing wrong with starting really, really ambitious, but one of my I think biggest weaknesses is trying to carry too much. And so I had one project where a good friend asked me to work on a cultural engagement for their office, and we tried to build a treasure hunt around the city. And it was not in a city that I lived in. And so we tried to do a lot of things over kind of Google Earth. And I just said yes a lot. And it's one of those things where I get really excited about a potential project and wanting to help people, not recognizing the potential kind of pitfalls of Google Earth not being up to date or something of that nature, right? And so a lot of clues that we built for this particular game didn't end up being kind of current places that people could go to. We tried to pick kind of monuments in the city that would have plaques and things that were fairly stationary and wouldn't move or change. But turns out that there was quite a big construction project that happened in one of the locations we tried. So that was kind of a comical day of confusion from afar. But it's one of those lessons that I always sort of point to as, one, do your research, two, don't overextend yourself, and three, really think about how you can work smarter, not harder, and leverage the people that are on the ground and closest to the problem, and don't try to take on too much yourself. So that's one of the biggest things that I have a hard time with, is I love to say yes to things and slowly learning how to say no.
And how can you share a quick tip on what you've learned in the recent times about how to say no to some of the projects? Because that's really difficult.
Yeah, especially when the whole business of Game Genius is working in kind of the creative philanthropy space, and you have nonprofits that come to you with just incredibly serious and emotional issues, and to be able to say yes to that is invigorating for me. But when you take on a lot of projects, you start to spread yourself a little too thin. And so for me, I think just being able to manage your time, recognize how much it's going to take you to complete a project to the best of your ability, and really thinking about it sort of in building blocks. So if you've got so many hours of the day that you can work without burning out, think about how many projects fit into that block, and cap it very strictly, and kind of come up with a way to engage organizations in a light way if you want to get involved with them, but nothing that will compromise the projects that you've already said yes to.
Interesting, because as well, as usual, I mean, it's also a business. You're also helping very interesting organizations, and you're trying to help as much as you can as well. But you also have a business to run, and you have to, feed your family. So you have to make sure you say to yes pretty often, but you also have to say no, or I'm just going to kind of get involved every now and then.
Yeah, it's with a lot of projects. So Game Genius is structured to be, once we kind of grow big enough, a benefit corporation of sorts, where we're trying to do as many for-profit projects as pro bono projects, and a lot of the opportunities where we're creating a custom game for a nonprofit are not coming with cost. And so we do have to balance that sort of, we only can take so many of these projects as much as we want to do them. We can only take so many right now, and as we scale up our team, hopefully we'll have more bandwidth to be able to succeed and to help teams.
Absolutely, because if you stop, if the company stops because you all burn out, then you won't be able to help all these people. So that makes sense.
Exactly. The game ends.
Yes, absolutely. And turning this completely around and going, actually, instead of for that first attempt at learning or that fail moment, would you like to share a story of one of those times that actually things went probably not smoothly, because iteration is always part of the process.
Yes.
But that you're proud of that end result, and we want to be there with you, see some of the success factors that you would attribute that to.
Yeah, you mentioned again in the intro about a game that we made around toxic partisanship, and I would say, especially here in the U.S., it's becoming more and more visible and or audible, depending on how you consume your media. And one of the things that really struck me as I stepped away from golf was I wanted to be more engaged in a local community. And so it allowed me to really dive deep and ask people some questions about, how can we get along? How can we come to a common ground when we clearly don't agree on maybe key values or opinions on certain issues, but how can we at least be in the same room and be together? And I would say one of the biggest lessons that I learned while doing my sort of in-depth interviews with people was that games were an amazing medium to come together and use as a creative tool to help people engage and lower their barriers and form trust and relationships with people. And so one of the first products that I started working on, actually before the company even started, was a game called Consensus. And we've used it in so many different applications. We've gone into families and helped kind of families play and bond and come up with ways that they can organize themselves. We've gone into family foundations and helped them think about how they could give more efficiently or more aligned with what their group values. Sometimes it's just defining what those values are. And we've used the game. We've gone into organizations of social entrepreneurs to help them come up with strategies of what their next steps might be. Just everything where you might have some form of debate or question about what your next steps or what could you do, or do you prefer this or that? That's what the game was designed to do, is to show how we can have a productive conversation. And because it comes from the space of it was right after the 2016 election here in the US, which was a really dividing time, and the last 3.5 years has sort of continued to feed into that divisiveness. And so this game is trying to show why we polarize as a community when we don't, when we're not transparent about kind of our perspectives, our opinions. The game kind of has a competitive and collaborative edge to it, which has been a really cool way to engage different audiences or similar audiences to see if they're more of a competitive or collaborative bunch, and then use that as sort of a stepping stone for addressing their particular problems. And so that has been a success story that we've been able to use pretty much everywhere we go. Is just a starting conversation, and it really helps us show how games can be a center point for moving forward.
Interesting. And if you can, even if right now or later after the interview for the show notes, if you have any link that references to that game, it would be fantastic to put it in the show notes as well.
Absolutely.
So we've been talking about both success and failure, sometimes where we have learned from these things. You have a lot of experience creating all of these things. As you mentioned, it's not only about Game Genius, but some things that you were doing before as well. Also, as golf, as you know, as everybody knows, golf as a sport is also a game in itself. So yes. You have extensive experience with games. And I would like to know, when you're going to face one of these issues that you want to solve, or one of these experiences you want to create, how do you do it? Do you have a process? Do you follow some steps? Do you just, serendipity comes in and, the fairy inspires you and tells you what to do? How does it work for you?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up golf. There was this pillow growing up that was stitched into it, said life is a game, but golf is serious. And it sort of plays to this sort of mantra, I think, of golfers, which is that, golf is the most serious thing that you'll do. And everyone is so addicted to it because it's just one of those games. If you really kind of dive in. Well,
you can ask the soccer player, the football player, Gareth Bale about that. You know?
Exactly.
Wales, golf, and then, the job, which is playing for Madrid.
Playing for Madrid. I can't tell you how many athletes I've met in the last 10 years that have been like, yeah, I really enjoy golf more than the sport that I play. And I'm like, well, why don't you play golf? It's like, well, this one doesn't pay the bills. So. But I really take from the ways that I taught myself the game of golf, and the way that I really like to think about game design is as a balance between quickly iterating an idea. So anything that comes to mind, just being able to find what resonates with people, and balancing that with sort of the in-depth research of really understanding who the players or the stakeholders in the game might be. I think if you can balance those two things really well, a development track begins to form sort of in front of you, where you can, again, sort of oscillate between, here's a game concept I want to try. I tried it. I think this is a really cool game dynamic that works. And, here's this really neat concept that I want to learn more about. Maybe it's sustainability. Maybe it's, I want to talk about homelessness or financial literacy or something, anything that you're really passionate about. I want to dive deeper and figure out what is the story I'm trying to tell. And then as you kind of go back and forth between iterating and researching, I think a really sort of well-developed game starts to emerge where you can play test it with specific questions. And that sort of adds that third element of just getting the whole package together and making sure that the story and the sort of research and iteration pieces meld in the way that you want it to, and that the take home or the sort of summary of the game tells a story that you really meant it to tell. I think when you think about those two things in balance, it really helps you come up with a good end result.
And it should definitely. So coming back and forth, are there, again, as I asked before, are there any tips for that back and forth, how to find those game dynamics? Because of course, with your experience, it might even sound easy, but for some people who might have less experience, maybe it's about playing more games, maybe it's, What would you say about that?
Yeah, I would say, from a game design perspective, one of the things that's helped me the most, I love just playing different game dynamics and getting inspiration off of games, whether it's something really popular or something that's super abstract. It could be one of those kind of niche games that is in a category that you're curious about. But play as many games as you can. Every game dynamic is slightly different. That's why it exists. and so really sort of dive deep into why do I like this and not like that, right? And why do people resonate around a game that has this specific dynamic? So thinking about like an Uno, it's a super, super popular game. It's really, really simple. It's numbers and colors. What is it about that dynamic that people really kind of glom onto? And how can you use those really engaging dynamics to maybe, great artists steal, right? That's sort of an expression that I think a lot of people know, but how can you manipulate that dynamic in a really clever way that attaches to the research that you're doing? So a tip is always to think kind of while you're playing a game that exists out in the world, how can this relate and what lessons am I learning from this game that can relate to the thing that I want to build? I think once you put yourself in that perspective, you'll be surprised, even if you don't consider yourself a game designer today, I think you'll be surprised how many ideas come to your mind. And especially as you continue to play and see more and more game dynamics, those ideas start to sort of flood your brain. And then it's about picking which one you want to go with, which is another challenge.
Absolutely. And that was precisely where you were mentioning how to go back and forth from, your objectives, your audience, the setting you want to put them at. And that's where you go back and forth and test them as well, which is super, super important.
Yeah.
Engagers, just a quick message here. This Wednesday, March 25th of 2020 at 7 p.m. Central European Time, which is Madrid, where I'm based, I will be hosting a live session with Dustin Stats of Board Gaming with Education. You can get all the details and register through the link provided, along with this episode, which is 126 with Peter Williamson. But if you prefer typing it live, here it goes. boardgamingwithEducation.com/remote-adventure. That's, that little line that goes right in the middle. And I hope to see you there. Peter, I would like to know if there is something that you would say is sort of a best practice or something that any of these projects in gamification and game-based, whatever that you want to talk about can almost always or usually at least benefit from.
It's a great question. I would say one of the things that I personally have benefited the most from is just having a diverse set of playtesters. Having perspectives that are different from your own in the room is incredibly important. I think we tend to kind of get stuck in our own head. I know from my example of creating a treasure hunt or a scavenger hunt in a city where I thought this is going to be amazing. Like I've got all these really cool puzzles and people are going to love this. Some people might not, right? Just like learning, I think everyone has a slightly different way that they like to learn and that they prefer to to consume information and be able to communicate. And so just thinking about how you can set up playtesting in a way that gets as many of those perspectives in the room, so that when you put out a game, you can be really confident that this has some form of applicability to the ways that they're learning or that they want to play, or it tells a story in kind of a neat and different way because people have given you a bunch of what they've already heard and you're trying to come up with something new. So it just helps you find those opportunities in a much more efficient way. I mean, you could sit on your couch for a year and probably not come up with a brand new idea. And as soon as you start playing with a couple people and ideas start flowing.
Absolutely. And within that sort of diversity that you get there, because there's, depending on who you're designing for, because if it's for like a citizen of a city, it could be super, super diverse.
Right.
But maybe sometimes it's for the workers of a certain company that has a certain working culture, or it could be for this profile of people. So within those specifics, so to speak, you try to get as diverse as possible as well, or do you even go outside of that sort of publics?
It really depends. So for projects that we do, I think the result or the consumer of the project is going to determine what kind of the diversity looks like. You're totally right. I mean, the role, you could go within an organization, the role might be to create something very internal, which is you're going to want to get the people that are in management and leadership. You're also going to want to get the people that might be sort of part-time and coming in 1-2 days a week just to get perspectives of how they view the business, the organization, the stakeholders that are sort of around this business. Having more of those in the room will always help. And then taking it sort of a step further, if you want to take that game into the community, it's really important to think about how can I be intentional around the audience that I'm trying to bring it to, and what will be most helpful. And generally, if you are not representing whatever diversity you're going after, it's that much more important to listen.
Absolutely. You're going to have a harder time listening to those people for sure.
Exactly. I cannot stress enough the importance of sort of listening to other people.
Absolutely. Super important. And it's very linked to the importance of playtesting in and of itself.
Yep. Yes. The playtesting, it is a sort of an ego gut check.
Yeah.
You can come up with some really cool ideas that you've thought through for a long time, and you just have to be very open for feedback. Otherwise, you're not going to get something honest.
Yes, absolutely. And in that same sense that you are giving us recommendations and something we should probably do, but as well, is there, after listening to these questions, I know you've heard a couple of episodes as well, you have a past friend as well who was on the podcast. Is there anybody else that you would recommend as well that you would like to listen to in an episode like this one in Professor Game?
Yeah, so there is a guy who I actually just connected to the other day. His name is Vincent Su. He started a company called Press Start Hong Kong, and he does a lot of gamification learning. And it's funny how similar our two companies are. And it was amazing to connect with him and just share best practices. And so I would love for you to interview him, because I'm sure he's a little bit, he's been in the industry for a little bit longer than I have. And it's always interesting, again, to get perspectives that are outside of my own. And so thinking about what's sort of the game industry like in Hong Kong, and how are they coping with what's going on right now in the world, and how are they using games to help sort of solve problems and build empathy. Absolutely.
Sounds like an interesting character. And if you're interested in people that have been, because he's not anymore, he's back to the US, you might want to listen to Dustin's stats of the Board Gaming with Education as well. He was living in Taiwan until like months ago.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
And again, in recommendation space, is there any book, or what book would you recommend the engagers, this audience, and why would you recommend it?
Yeah, so I knew this question was coming, and there's a joke that sort of goes around family and friends. I'm not a huge reader. I am very much a visual medium type of person. And so I was racking my brain for books that are slightly different. I have read, I have completed a book in my life, but the one of my favorite ways to think about books is, not surprisingly, gamification, but gamification by showing and doing, and not necessarily talking about it directly. So there's a great book called Ella-Minnow-P. So it's ELLA, minnow, and P is in like the vegetable. And it's this very, very clever book. I won't give away surprise, I guess, but the whole concept is that there's a community that has this sort of statue or thing that they celebrate in their community, and it has a phrase on it: the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, and one day one of the letters falls off, and they see it as a sign, and as the book continues, they start to drop letters away from the actual words of the story. And so by the end of the book, you've started to lose the alphabet. And it's a really clever way to think about how you can use literature in almost a gamified way, and challenging your brain to come up with sentence structures without the letter R. Right. And just thinking about how kind of word games and how that really challenges your mind to sort of flip on its head. Okay, how can I come up with something different in a traditional context? And I think that's what brilliant games do really well, is think about, hey, everyone knows what a book is, but how can I challenge sort of what a book is and what it sort of traditionally looks like, to form something new and something fun for the consumer or the reader.
And within a book.
And within the book. I know. It's one of those like kind of meta. It's a meta game. I wouldn't call it a gamification thing itself, but I think it embodies what you talk about a lot on this podcast.
Absolutely. And once again, one of the most difficult questions is coming up, according to at least the guest feedback. And it has to do with, what would you say is your favorite game?
It is. It's the impossible question for every person who loves games, because we love, I think, the variety. But games, picking one is very, very difficult for me. I love sort of social psychology and kind of the bluffing games, because I think it really does bring out the best and worst of people. There's a dice game called Dudo. It's very simple. If you've ever watched Pirates of the Caribbean, I think they play it in one of the movies. But it's basically a sort of a liar's dice type of game, and an elimination style format. Very, very simple to learn. Pretty much everyone can play it, and it's just sort of it's a really good starter game, just to get people in the mood, and then going from there. I've always loved word games and escape rooms and things that get people to think both competitively and collaboratively.
Absolutely. It sounds very interesting and very exciting as well as a game to get started. And those are always very interesting, because some people in the audience might be wondering, well, maybe I'm not such a gamer, or people when you go to a workshop might be wondering that. So it could be a good way to get started. I've never played it myself, I have to admit.
I'm trying to come up with something that will be new. I've heard so many amazing interviews and a lot of different ideas, and I'm like, I got to come up with something that's different. But that is truly one of my favorite games that was not mentioned. So
beautiful. And yeah. What would you say in this world of gamification and game-based solutions? What would you say is your superpower? That thing that you do better, at least, than most people.
So I think. It's another really interesting question, especially today with what's going on sort of in the world. Is I think from a mental health perspective, I think being able to see everything as a game has been something that is both a superpower and probably my greatest weakness, right? I think a lot of people have kind of used their superpower as also a cloak for weakness. But seeing everything as a game, ever since I was a kid, I loved learning through games. I wanted to turn anything I saw into a game. That could have been a kinetic challenge, like minute to win it style, where you're taking random objects around the house and turning it into a game where it's a basketball game or something, right? Or it's seeing someone have an issue or a problem and thinking, how can I challenge myself to turn this into an opportunity where that person can both enjoy the process of solving that problem, but also be really respectful of that process. And so it's just been kind of a lifelong learning of turning anything I see into a game. which sounds sort of like a nightmare probably for some people. But what I find that it does is that I think at a core of a lot of games is it teaches you about risk management, which is really important for resiliency and being able to sidestep problems. And again, so thinking about this era, or right now, the time that we're living in, being resilient and having the ability to kind of sidestep and find your best path forward and not get too bogged down by sort of the emotions of everything has been a really helpful. I find a lot of the time my role is to just be sort of a stabilizing force. And so as you build games, you can sort of build into the emotion of the storytelling, or you can build into sort of the algorithm of the game. And I'm definitely more on the algorithm side of that equation. And so to that point, am not the best person to try to get an emotion out of. So definitely being cognizant of how I can get better, especially given that I'm in philanthropy. How can I empathize, and how can I help people at the emotional level as well? And so one of the big things I'm working on is mental health, and thinking about how I can create a treasure hunt this year about mental health in DC, and different ways to support the organizations that are in that field so I can learn more about it.
Beautiful. I think we have a couple of minutes left if we can go for the random question that comes up now and then, and it's already here. I have it. If you
spin
agree,
the wheel.
Yes, if you agree, we will do this relatively quickly. I think it's a deep question, but we can give some pointers to Antonina Zuzana. I think she's Polish because of what she mentions. And the question is simple, but it has also some comments. The question is, how do you price a project? She says she's a freelance consultant, a young one, and gamification is still a new field here in Poland. It's hard for her to decide on the price, and especially to defend it during a negotiation with a client. So what are your thoughts on this topic, Peter?
What a question. What a time. It's a really, really good question. And the best answer I can give to that is trusting the amount of work that you put into the process. I mean, consultants in general have this problem all the time, right? Where you're constantly battling how much sort of your time is worth. And as you're getting started with something new, especially in a place that might not have as much of this particular industry, convincing people is very, very difficult. DC is similar in that regard. It's not the most playful. I think that would be fair. But really trying to advocate for the amount of time and energy and just skill set that goes into designing a custom game or a new game for the market. I think just being very transparent about your process will help. It will help convince yourself that what you're doing has value. And when you look at the precedents in the market, so thinking about other games that exist or other consultants that are maybe doing other creative type things, you can start to put together a first estimate of what you think that might be. And then as time goes on, you'll start to see these are the prices that people are really balking at and saying, like, this is too much. I can't take this risk. Try to put yourself in their perspective. It's something brand new that most likely they haven't heard of before. And so really come at it from an angle of something they understand and try to make that comparable. Start there and then sort of ramp up. And as you build confidence, I think you'll find that your ability to sort of project a price onto what you're offering comes off in a much more believable way. I know I certainly struggled at the beginning.
Absolutely.
I was like, oh, this can be free, right? This is, I'm not providing that much value, but at the end of the day, the experiences that you've had will just continue to build your confidence. So give something a shot. If nothing else, the best thing you can do is play and ask people, again, getting those diverse perspectives of what people might be willing to pay. And then having some actual data to back it up is always great. So find some core sets of friends or people that are willing to support you and get some data to back up the prices that you're offering.
Absolutely. And sometimes just racking up a little bit of even for free experience is always going to help show some results. And that's something I think could be valuable every now and then if you can find something you're really passionate about, because you're talking about the nonprofits, and that's you can even see it as an opportunity to ramp up your capacities and your project abilities and so on. So thank you very much. That was very, very insightful, Peter. I think that was very interesting. And I hope Antonina is able to appreciate that as well and apply it into her, her daily struggles with that we all have at some point for sure. So Peter, we're running to the end of the interview. Do you have any quick final piece of advice? Please let us know where we can find you and Game Genius on the internet. And then we'll say, of course, that it's game over.
Yeah. No, I just would love to reiterate that what you're doing, Rob, is wonderful, and just curating these conversations. These are diverse perspectives coming from the game industry. It's a fairly new industry in a lot of different ways, but it also has been around for a long time. And so it's think about the people that you're playing with, the message you're trying to tell. Simplicity is always really important, and don't be afraid to innovate. Is sort of my last piece of advice is be brave and go out and try things. You can find me at gamegenius.org. Social media is at GameGenius LLC, and you can always message me on LinkedIn if you want to have a chat.
Beautiful. That's great. It was great to have you today. I think we got a lot of new perspectives, a lot of interesting ideas and processes and so on. So thank you very much, Peter, for everything you offered today. However, for now, and at least for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Engagers, it's fantastic to have you around. And this podcast, as you know, it only makes sense having you. So why not connect on Twitter? You can let me know things like the questions you have, anything that we can help you with. I don't know, maybe featured guests that you'd like to see on the podcast. You can find my Twitter account in professorgame.com/Twitter. I'm sharing content on game-based solutions, gamification, and all the related, especially in the area of education and even further higher education, which is where I also have my day job. So don't click continue yet. Quick pause. Do you want to know how does this short Sims methodology of Clark Aldrich work and what's coming up in his new book? Well, then all you have to do is subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.